Okay, about ready to introduce you. Okay, hi, I'm Metta Spencer. I'm in Toronto, and so is Matt Korda, which is kind of a treat. I've never met Matt Korda in the flesh, but then there are a lot of people nowadays that I know very well from Zoom that I've never met in the flesh. So that's not unusual, but this time I'm going to get acquainted with him because we have a whole hour to ourselves. Now, I presume Matt stands for Matthew. Is that right? Okay. Matthew Korda is I would call him a nuclear journalist. Is that fair enough?
Sure.
Nuclear researcher. Anyway, he's hot property. We are all eager to get to know him and understand what he's doing. Those of us who are peace activists or anti-nuclear weapons activists, we already are aware of his work a little bit. So Matt is in Toronto, but he goes back and forth between here and Washington when the pandemic will allow him to cross borders. And he works for the Federation of American Scientists, and he works along with a guy named Hans Christensen, who is also just a name to me. In fact, I've never even seen a photo of Christensen, but I guess they work together a lot. And I'm very active in the Canadian Pugwash movement. So, when I saw that Matt was living in Toronto, I thought, oh, good, we'll get him into Pugwash. But nowadays, Pugwash is also just a Zoom conference call now and then. So we don't ever get together and it doesn't really mean anything. But anyway, welcome to Pugwash, Matt Korda.
Thank you.
All right. So I'm glad, very, very happy that we'll have a chance to get acquainted. Okay, now the reason I'm saying that he's hot property is that he made sort of, if not headlines, at least sub-headlines, headlines for major articles a few weeks ago, when he was the guy who seems mostly to have discovered some nefarious progress that the Chinese are making in developing their nuclear arsenal. And he will come back and show us what he's been doing now, I think, is searching his computer for maps or whatever. Are you allowed to show us everything you want, Matt?
I can show you some stuff. Certainly the some of the pieces that we published, and we can go into some of the images and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all these things which other people can look at and say, looky there, there's a missile. I can't see it, but I'm sure you have an eagle eye for missiles. So, well, anyway, let's begin earlier on, because I want to know how a guy gets to be a nuclear detective, such as you are. And tell me your history. Where'd you come from? Are you a Torontonian all along? You are. Good. Well, we have more to be proud of.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm from Toronto. I have lived most of my life here. I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Toronto.
In what field?
In European studies, and that was kind of a interdisciplinary degree, so you could kind of pick and choose different things to fit into it. So I focused a lot on European history and languages as well, and politics. And I also did kind of minors in history and American studies as well. And kind of from there, I ended up doing my master's at King's College in London in the Department of War Studies. And they have a...
I'm sorry, Department of what studies?
The Department of War Studies.
Oh, yeah. They don't mince words. They don't call it.
No. There was a different university at Bradford that has a Department of Peace Studies. And so the Peace Studies Department from Bradford and the War Studies Department from King's would meet up every year and play an annual soccer match called the Tolstoy Cup. It would be like the War and Peace soccer match every year. So that was pretty fun. And so I was at King's in 2016.
Let me ask you, because I should know really more the answer to this, but there are many more departments of security studies and things like that, war studies and so on in universities than there are peace studies. And I always believe that basically the people teaching in war studies are actually kind of not only inured to the idea that war is somehow inevitable and that's just part of life, but they kind of like it. and so and I don't know whether that's fair or not. There could very well be people teaching in a Department of War Studies who are trying to find solutions, and I don't know whether there are or not. What do you think?
It's a good question. I would say it's a fair characterization for many departments, and there have been increasingly more studies out there that kind of show that some of these university departments are well funded by weapons industries or by governments or contractors and things like that. So there's those ties are certainly there. That being said, my experience, I found that my professors were really, really interesting. They, I wouldn't consider any of them to be like war hawks or anything like that. I thought they were fantastic. And, but certainly, there are those ties are there, right? Like at King's as well. Like King's isn't immune to that sort of thing. And, there is, I would say, there's certainly an emphasis in certain security studies departments on a much more kind of hard security lens rather than a quote unquote softer security lens. And so I think that is a trend that I've noticed as well, which is, in certain departments, there's a much greater focus on kind of like kinetic warfare than there would be about addressing kind of the root causes of war. So that's I think a kind of a notable point there.
Okay, I distracted you, but I think it is sort of a question I never really seriously asked before, even though I have my prejudices. And I know I've offended people who are, I would call them militarists. So I had a big fight with a person that I had invited to join Pugwash because he basically was interested in peacekeeping and, good things. And yet I used the word militarist. And boy, was he offended. He, because you guys should realize that we're protecting you and you should honor us. And
right.
and I said, look, I speak peace lingo very well. I'm very fluent. And this is a common terminology that we use. So get used to it, kiddo.
Right.
Anyway, we haven't continued the conversation. Okay, a distraction, which I'm prone to doing. I very apologize in advance. I lead you off track. So here you are at the Department of War Studies at
King's College.
King's College, okay. I don't know the London map well enough to know that's a separate thing from LSE, right? It's not at all.
They're basically across the street, but it's a separate university.
Okay, go on. All right, so here you are studying war, and
and I was studying kind of more on the international law side of things, and so that was what I was really interested in. And I had a lot of friends that were in this kind of nuclear specific program that was one of the streams that you could do, and that wasn't the program that I was in, but I just kept hearing all of these really good things about it, and I thought it sounded really interesting. And around that time, I also came across John Hersey's series of essays on Hiroshima from 1945, and I read those, and that was kind of the first thing I really read about nuclear weapons, and that was really horrifying, but also really really kind of drew me in, and that was kind of the lens through which I approached the topic of nuclear weapons. And as I started to I just sort of started meeting with the professors that were teaching the nuclear courses kind of on the side, and learning from them. And I thought it was really fascinating. And so I kind of got drawn in that way. And then so when I finished my degree,
let me interrupt you again, because I'm really interested in the fact that you say plural professors who were all working on these things. That amazes me, because I taught for free for about 5 years a course at the University of Toronto on not just nuclear weapons, but nuclear health and public health in a nuclear age is what I call the thing. So I could talk about nuclear power and nuclear weapons. And the reason I did it was that, as I could tell, there was not a single course at the University of Toronto about nuclear weapons, even that had more than one lecture or something on it.
Wow.
And I just find that deplorable. And I don't know whether it's still the case, but the idea that you're talking about a place where there are several professors that specialize in this.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay.
It was great. There was a whole department about it, and like a whole stream and things, that various courses that you could take. And so I ended up writing my master's dissertation on nuclear weapons, even though I hadn't really taken any courses in nuclear weapons, because I just kind of got so interested during my degree. And so I wrote my dissertation about kind of historical case studies looking at how the United States used various tactics to dissuade its own allies from getting nuclear weapons during the 60s and 70s. So that was a lot of fun.
That's very interesting. Like what? Give me some examples of countries that succumbed to that kind of pressure. Was Canada one of them?
Canada wasn't one of my case studies, but I focused a lot on West Germany in particular, and South Korea. I looked at Pakistan as kind of a failed example, because Pakistan did end up getting nuclear weapons, but in each of those case studies, there was kind of this push and pull between those countries wanting a more robust security guarantee from the United States, and the United States worried that if they didn't provide it, then those countries would go nuclear. And so there's kind of there was a lot of back channel communication between, the diplomats from, South Korea and Germany and things like that, and the United States, where they were kind of angling for more US presence, more security guarantees, and the US having to kind of walk this balance between not wanting to promise too much, but not wanting to promise too little either, because if you promise too little, those countries had made it very clear that they would pursue nuclear weapons. So it's kind of an interesting proliferation question.
Well, it sounds like what you're talking about is the emergence of the extended deterrence doctrine, right? Which I don't know, but as far as I am guessing, there's not a single document that says, here's US policy, we'll do this, this, and this for those countries that will do this, this, and this. It's not like one treaty or one special deal. It's just like a whole bunch of separately negotiated understandings or something. Is that right?
Yeah, that's kind of my understanding as well. Like there are individual treaties with various countries like Japan, South Korea, and then there's NATO as well, right? So there's the Article 5 guarantees there, and there's no, as far as I'm aware, there's no kind of explicit language that says that includes like nuclear use, but it's implied, right, through these alliances, and so it's kind of an interesting dynamic there.
Because I had a conversation a few months ago with a guy from the Union of Concerned Scientists, Kulaki. It was
Yeah.
And he was talking with concern about the fact that the Japanese were pressuring. I guess it was already Biden's. I think it was, at least Biden was in the wings, to not go for this no first use, or what is it, sole purpose kind of agreement, because they want the nuclear umbrella still. And yeah, so so if there's nothing in writing that precludes it, then Biden could, or if he gets the support in the US, could adopt such policy, right? And or is there some sort of treaty between Japan and the US such that he would be abrogating it if he did?
I think the way that it's phrased in things like the Nuclear Posture Review, it's phrased in the sense of, the United States could use nuclear weapons to protect the interests of the United States and its allies. And it includes like the kind of "and allies" clause in there that is, I think, is intended to encompass, countries like Japan and South Korea. But it's not there's nothing, there are, there's various congressional aspects, because, there are some bills out there in Congress that are both for and against the declaration of a no first use policy. But there's nothing in writing that would preclude President Biden from adopting one if that was the decision that they wanted to make. I guess there's a whole other discussion about whether or not they're going to do that, or whether they're going to adopt some kind of a variant of a traditional no first use posture that says something like sole purpose instead. But that's still kind of an open question.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe we can come back to that, because it's really an important issue.
Yeah.
And a little vague. I'm not sure where things stand or what to expect of anybody. Maybe you do.
They're still going through, like right now, the process for writing up the Nuclear Posture Review has only just started a few weeks ago. So, they've created the working groups and everything, and these questions are all being discussed kind of behind the scenes at the moment. And I think there's some public outreach about it, and now is a time in which I think there's consultations happening about this stuff, but we probably won't know what the final wording is on any declaration that they're going to make. Possibly not for another year, maybe a little bit less when the Nuclear Posture Review comes out. Hopefully less. It'd be great if it was faster.
Okay. Well, okay. Maybe we'll come back to that, because it's really important. Okay. I keep interrupting you, but go on. Here you have now you finished your dissertation. This is like a master's thesis, or what?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then what happened?
And then I continued working at King's. I stayed on there for a few more months doing research on deterrence theory for a few professors there. And then from after that, I had a short 6-month stint at NATO in the Arms Control, Disarmament, and Non-Proliferation Center. Oh. And so it was a really interesting time, because it was an interesting time to kind of be a fly on the wall, because there were so many interesting issues that were kind of coming into focus around that time. There was the big one being kind of the slow dissolution of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which kind of fell apart quite publicly around that time. So there was a lot of fallout, because NATO allies, I think, were on the whole opposed to the treaty going away, that the United States was kind of calling the shots, and Russia had there were allegations that Russia had violated the treaty. So there was a lot going on around that time. So it was an interesting time just to kind of be there and to watch that kind of play out. And then after that, I moved to Washington, D.C. to start my job at the Federation of American Scientists.
So you got hired from Brussels.
Yeah.
All right. So you must have been doing fun things there. Okay. Okay. Now let's see. In Brussels, you're talking about the slow dissolution of the INF. Well, I'm trying to, that, I guess you're right, but I don't have any impression about that. The slow dissolution. What year are we talking about, and what indicators do you have in mind that it was dissolving?
So
I can't,
around
it doesn't, no bells ring for me when you say that.
I think it was around 2013, 2014 was when the Obama administration first began to kind of publicly, or maybe it was perhaps privately, note that Russia was in violation of the treaty with a new weapon system that they had developed. And for several years, Russia just didn't acknowledge that there had been a violation. They kept saying that there was no violation. And then eventually they said, okay, the weapon system that you're talking about does exist, but it isn't a violation. It's we're within the correct range requirements. And there was this impasse. And then Russia later said that the United States was violating the treaty for various reasons.
Is that the thing about these submarine canisters that they had about the size of the missiles that would go in these submarines? Is that when they allege that the U.S. did something wrong? Fill me in, because I think I know what you're talking about. I can't describe it.
So I think there were a few different violations that the Russians, or alleged violations that the Russians said that the US was doing. And so one of them they said was related to the test targets that the United States uses for its missile defense systems. They shoot up like a test target and then use the missile defense system to shoot it down. And Russia said that was a violation. They had another statement where they said that certain drones that the United States had could constitute a violation. And then they had another one, which is kind of the most robust one that they talked about a lot, which was that US missile defense systems that are deployed in Europe could have the potential to be a violation if the US put offensive missiles in them instead of defensive interceptors, because they're functionally quite similar. And so those were kind of the three things that Russia pushed out, and the United States denied them, and Russia was denying that it had violated the treaty. So there was a whole kind of back and forth. Eventually, the Trump administration pulled out of that treaty, or they announced that they were going to withdraw from the treaty in, I believe it was 2018, and then the treaty formally dissolved in 2019. And so
but it sounds like you were seeing handwriting on the wall from these mutual allegations at the time. If let's say if Obama had been reelected, would he have withdrawn based on these, dissolution that was going on that you see? Because I never know what to make of Obama. Certainly that Prague speech indicated he pretty ambitious about disarmament, but and I remember talking to Joe Cirincione, who said that Obama, he was sure that he really wanted disarmament, nuclear disarmament, or a lot of progress in that direction, but he couldn't get it because he had to make a deal with the Senate to get approval for the New START thing. And that was the price to be paid. But I don't know. Do you feel, if all these other accusations were going on at the time, inside NATO, did it feel like the Americans were really on the way to pulling out of the INF agreements?
It's kind of unclear, to be honest. I'm of the opinion that if I think I actually got this from Joe. Joe used to say this a lot, which is like a great quote, which is, if someone is violating the law, you don't throw away the law, right? Because then you lose the chance to hold them to account, right? And that was kind of what the Trump administration did. I thought, unfortunately, was that there was a credible allegation that Russia was in violation of the treaty, and then the response that they chose was to basically dissolve the treaty. right? That thus removing any ability for the United States to continue to, hold Russia accountable, even though who knows if that was going to work or not, who knows if they would come back into compliance. But I don't know, I'm generally of the opinion that it's not a good strategic move to throw away a mechanism for ensuring compliance with arms control.
Well, I'm just wondering who was really responsible for doing that, and do we really want to say that the plan was already underway under Obama and Trump just fulfilled it, or could we? And Putin, is there anybody who would say that actually Putin would have done the equivalent on his own? Or what I guess people would prefer to believe is it was all stupid old Trump and nobody else.
It's a good question. I guess I don't really have the answer on like what would Putin do I guess there was no real reason for him to exit the treaty if they were indeed, it seemed like the allegation that they were in violation was credible, right? So if they were indeed violating it, then there's no real need for them to get rid of the treaty because they could violate it while the treaty was in place. It was not my understanding that the Obama administration had any interest in withdrawing from the treaty.
Okay.
I think they continuously raised the issue and they said, quite publicly, like Russia is in violation of the treaty. We are exploring methods to try and get them back into compliance. But it wasn't my understanding that they had any interest in dissolving the treaty. But the Trump administration it seems like they similarly, at least for the first year, maybe they explored some measures to try and get Russia back into compliance, and then eventually just kind of gave up and withdrew.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, thank you for that. I feel better now, a little bit, although the thing's gone. But at any rate,
yeah,
I know I like to know whom to blame.
Rest in
Onward.
peace, INF.
Okay, so now you moved to Washington and you work for FAS. And did they tell you what to do, or how did you find you to work with Hans Christensen? Is that mostly what you do?
Yeah. So I took a job at FAS in September 2018. So it's almost my 3-year anniversary there. And that job was to work on the Nuclear Information Project, which is Hans's project that he's been doing for several decades now, which is the purpose being to kind of pull back the curtain on nuclear secrecy as it relates to all 9 nuclear states, right? So during the Cold War, all of these decisions about nuclear weapons were taken in such secrecy, and now that there are so many more ways for open source investigators to learn about what various countries are doing in the nuclear realm. You have all these tools like satellite imagery and social media analysis and things like that we can use to get a better picture of what's happening in all of these different countries. So at the Nuclear Information Project, Hans and I use all of these different methods, and we try and learn from governments and things about what's going on.
Well, now that's one of the things I wonder. How much of that surveillance technology is available to folks like you? And how good is it? Somebody once told me that you could read the license plates on cars from these satellites. I think other people have said they're not that good. And do you even know whether the military's capability is that advanced? And the second question is, how much of that stuff would you have access to? Because I don't think that FAS maintains its own fleet of satellites taking pictures of China.
I wish. That'd be very cool. Commercial satellite imagery has really evolved quite dramatically especially the past few years. And so now there's several different companies that provide different types of services that we have access to. So, there are certain companies that take, really close up photos, that where I don't know, I've never been able to read a car license plate, but you can get kind of close to that. You can certainly see cars on the road and things like that. And those companies, they take these really close up photos, but not super regularly. So maybe we get, photos of Russia or China once every, couple months or something like that.
Okay, now you're buying these from some company that's doing it, not military, right?
No, so they're not military companies, although perhaps it's possible that some of them have contracts with the government to supply, that kind of imagery. But
well, are they as good as the military in terms of how much they can see?
I don't know. It's my understanding that they're relatively close. I expect the military probably has, better whatever we have, a little better. But the stuff that we have, it's certainly enough to be able to make discoveries and look for things. And so, there's that. There are also other companies that are taking daily imagery of sites at slightly lower resolution, so you can really see how sites are changing on a day-to-day basis. Like I can log into my server and look and see, like this morning, how a site has changed since yesterday, using those kinds of products, which is very cool.
Huh. Okay. What do the commercial producers of this information, who buys it? If corporations or something, who wants it besides you? I mean, you probably don't have such deep pockets as Shell or
No. So they're used by a lot of different folks, right? So there's so I mentioned, some of them probably have government contracts, others perhaps universities, folks, because there's a lot of folks that are looking at satellite imagery that aren't just doing it on the military side like we are, right? So there's archaeologists, folks that are looking into how climate change is affecting, geology and how terrain is changing over time, things like that. So there are a lot of different fields that can make a lot of use of commercial satellite imagery, and we're just kind of one sector. And so some of those companies we pay for access, and some of them we have just close relationships with, and we're able to message them and say, hey, we're really interested in this one site. Can you take a high resolution picture for us? And then they send it back to us.
Do you pay for it or what?
Sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't.
I see. Okay, good. Now, so here I'm guessing now that you and some guy who looks like you, but who has his hair parted on the other side, he works in the Army and you work for FAS, and you're both looking for missile silos in China, new missile places, right? And you do not talk to each other, right?
No.
He will never tell you if what he found. So maybe he beat you to it, but you will never know. Am I guessing?
Yeah. So we have a pretty good idea that the military was aware of the sites that have been found in China recently by myself and by other researchers, well before we found them and disclosed them. So we were the first to disclose them publicly, but it's pretty certain that the military was aware of it beforehand, so they found them first.
Okay, how do you even go about deciding where to look? I mean, China's a pretty big country. And how big a site is it? Are we talking about 10 city blocks square, or?
The missile site that I found in eastern Xinjiang is about 800 square kilometers. So I'm not very good at distances. I'm trying to imagine like how many city blocks of Toronto that is, but I can't do
Okay.
it.
800
But 800
square
square kilometers.
kilometers is a hell of a lot bigger than a few square blocks.
Yeah.
That's like a county or something, isn't it?
It's pretty big.
Almost a province.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that Lop Nor, which is their testing site and has been all along, that it's the biggest nuclear testing site in the world. And it's also in Xinjiang, isn't it?
It's pretty close by, yeah.
Okay. Because the thing I was reading today was saying that the Uyghurs are very much affected, you know, because we hear about the persecution they do, that they're undergoing, but the connection with their nuclear mining and also their nuclear testing site apparently there's a real relationship, and these people are suffering from that too. But I you know, I don't know enough about it, and I want to find out more.
Yeah,
If there's anybody working on that, I don't know whether there's anything to be learned about it yet.
I would love to know more.
Okay, we'll stick together, and if you find out something, I'll share it. Let's share it with each other.
For sure.
Okay, so here you are. Are you all by yourself with a magnifying glass and a map in a basement someplace, and you're looking for a missile silo in China, or what?
Yeah, I've got my big monitor, which helps. I don't have to use my magnifying glass. But I can, you can zoom in pretty far with commercial satellite imagery these days. So it's a lot of just looking around and trial and error, and kind of the hunches that I worked off of to locate this particular site was that there had been another site, the first kind of Chinese missile silo site that was of this scale, had been found a couple weeks earlier by Decker Eveleth, who's a researcher at the Middlebury Institute out in Monterey in California. And so I had been looking at the site that he had found for a few weeks now, and diving into that in quite a detailed way. And
you're looking, what are you looking for? How do you know what to hunt for? Things that look like big holes in the ground, or construction equipment, or what do you, I mean, if I were to see it, obviously I wouldn't recognize a thing, but you know what to look for.
Yeah, so I can, if I can screen share, I can even show you. I can show you some images.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this.
Sure. Okay. Can you see this? So right here, this kind of pattern right here is what I stumbled across when I was first looking for additional Chinese silos. And
that little circle you've drawn? No, there's a circle up there, but that's not what you're pointing to. When you say this, you mean this area, this general area up in the north?
Yeah. So this area right here. So what we like, kind of there were a few signatures that made it kind of clear to me that this was a really similar site to the ones that had been found a couple of weeks ago. So one of them was just the size, right? So it was 800 square kilometers, which is pretty much exactly the same size as the previous silo field that had already been found.
Well, how can you tell where the 800 kilometers are? I mean, there's no fence around it, so I can see.
There actually is. There's not a fence, but there are roads. So you can see, kind of, if you follow my mouse, you can see right down here.
Oh, yeah.
It goes up like that. It's kind of this like series of interlocking triangles that goes like this. And
so that whole area that you've just delineated is the 800 square kilometers.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh yeah, okay.
And when you zoom in, what I saw were these kind of dome structures. And so these domes, which some people are calling bubbles, or some people are calling tents, we're calling them domes for now, but they're basically, they're climate control domes or tents. So the way that these silos are built is that they first clear an area. They'll build a road out there and then clear the area. And then they do a little bit of initial construction, and then they put up this dome, and they do more sensitive.
It's like something they blow up, like to cover a tennis court or something.
It's exactly like that. Yeah, it is like the exact same idea as like a tennis bubble or something like that. And so
are these people? I see some little dots. Are those people or what?
These little things right here, I think these might be vehicles, or there might just be little. They might just be like little storage areas
down there. I mean, would you be able to see a human figure?
I don't think so at this resolution. I don't think we would. I think we probably wouldn't be able to see people. If not, they would just be like a little pixel or something.
Okay, now your assumption is that this dome is meant to be camouflage. That they didn't want you to see that, what you're looking at now.
I'm not sure if they would be like camouflage, because I think it's kind of inevitable that if they're building all of these structures and everything in the desert, that someone is going to find them. So I think they must have known that someone would find them eventually. But what they're for is I think they serve two functions. So one of them is to protect whatever construction is going on inside from the elements, because you get a lot of sandstorms in the desert and just not great conditions for doing construction. Mm-hmm. So they make it a little easier for the workers to work in. And I think the kind of secondary utility of them is that people like me can't see what's going on underneath. So if we had daily imagery of these sites at a high resolution, we would be able to see what kind of construction they're doing underneath. But because these domes are over here, all we see is the domes.
So you say that they're missile silos. They're digging a hole, and what if they say no? We're digging a swimming pool.
So they have said something like that. There have been a lot of different theories about what they could be. The signatures that indicate to us that they are missile silos is that they bear pretty much a complete similarity to different sites that are known to be missile silos, because there's another site just like this up in Jilantai, which is where they do their training, the missile training area. And we have images, like very clear images there, of missiles being loaded into silos that look just like this. And they have the same tents, they have the same structure. And not only that, but they also have, certain support facilities that you can see in more blown up images that look like they have a military function. Just kind of the ways in which they've separated the silos. So there's kind of a 3-kilometer distance between each silo, which is, if you were building something else, like if you were building windmills, you wouldn't have that kind of distance between them. You would have them very close together. But for silos, you kind of want them a little further apart, because you don't want one bomb to be able to take out multiple silos. So there's a few different signatures that indicate to us that these are very likely to be silos. And on top of that, the US government basically came out and confirmed that their assessment was that they were also silos.
Mm-hmm. And they probably knew about it all along. Okay, yeah. Do the Chinese, do they ever tell the world, yeah, we've got nuclear missiles, and here they are, here's a map where we really keep them? Do they share any information publicly? No.
So China, they do not really share much information about their nuclear arsenal at all. In that regard, they're quite different than some other countries. So the United States, is relatively transparent about its nuclear arsenal. The United Kingdom, up until quite recently, was very transparent. Now it seems like they're making a shift towards less transparency, and that's kind of a shift that they've seemingly made in line with the Trump administration, because the Trump administration was also a little less transparent than the Obama administration. But China doesn't really talk very much about its nuclear arsenal. They talk about the utility of the arsenal, and they talk about the policies. So they talk about
They have what they declare as a no first use policy, right?
yes, yeah. So
They have all along.
they talk about a no first use policy. They talk about a minimum deterrent. They use that phrasing a lot.
Right.
And the United States has officials from the US have expressed some concern over whether or not those policies would function in a wartime scenario. Like, would China stick to its no first use policy or not? And we don't know, but China has been pretty consistent with its nuclear policy for decades, right? They've never really overtly changed their declaratory policy.
Now, but this is a breakthrough of some kind, a change. All these new missile silos that's not just more of the same, that's different.
Yeah, so it is different. I guess I would suggest that it's a kind of logical extension of their current policy. And when I think about it from their perspective, China talks about its nuclear policy by saying, we maintain the minimum nuclear arsenal necessary to maintain deterrence, to maintain this assured second strike capability.
Do they tell you how many they have?
No, but they just say we have the minimum. So now that they're building all of these new silos, clearly that would seem to contradict that minimum policy, right? Because if the minimum was what they had before, then now they're building all these new things, they've exceeded the minimum. From their perspective, though, they probably understand it as, okay, well, because of the ways in which Russia's nuclear arsenal is changing, the US's arsenal is changing, India's nuclear arsenal is changing, we need a new minimum, right? The goalposts for what counts as the minimum nuclear arsenal have also shifted.
Okay,
and
well,
so,
but no, look, I mean, as I understand it, if you say there is a change in, say, the Western NATO policy, et cetera, it isn't so much that they're building big new ones. It's more that they are emphasizing tactical battlefield size, small weapons, which would not be in these missile silos anyway, and would not be ICBMs. They would be on trucks or rail cars or something, and would be meant to go wherever there's a battlefield, right?
yes.
So that the Chinese installations wouldn't be relevant to that kind of new policy or new posture, right? I mean, maybe I'm inventing this, but
No, so certainly the tactical nuclear weapons are also a new dynamic that's coming into play. I think in this particular case, what China is worried about, and also I think what Russia is worried about, are improvements to US missile defenses. So I think there's been a huge push in the United States over the past few decades and especially now, to improve the US's missile defenses, to potentially negate an incoming strike from nuclear armed countries.
All right, now here we're really back to Star Wars Day, because
Yes.
I'm stuck in the conviction that they'll never really solve that, and that
I agree.
Okay, well, you say they've been making real progress. If they're making enough progress to get China worried, then what is this progress, please? I don't know.
So I'm with you on the I think missile defense has a really limited utility, at least based on what we're seeing from the results of their tests. They don't work as well as described. They can only function in really specific regional scenarios, but they're not useful for kind of a homeland defense. I think how Russia and China are concerned, they don't look at what the current capabilities are. They look at what the capabilities could be years from now. And they see that there's some progress being made, even though at the moment I completely agree that missile defense, US missile defense is not what it is advertised to be. I think they take kind of this longer view and they say, okay, well, in 10, 20 years, if this is what the US missile defenses look like, if they improve that substantially, then we can't stay the same where we are with our arsenals. We have to, innovate for them to go. So it's very much like kind of the Star Wars debate all over again. And we even saw this, when the Bush administration pulled out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty in 2002, both Russia and China made relatively clear statements. And they said, this is the cornerstone of the strategic stability regime. And if you pull out of this treaty, we're going to have to compensate for that in some way. And in, however many years, you will see the consequences. And I feel like now we're sort of starting to see what those consequences are, which is we're kind of getting this Star Wars 2.0, situation where, Russia and China are building lots of new types of weapons, with, one of the purposes being to get around US missile defenses. And I think there's a lot of other reasons too why they're building this kind of thing. There's, some of them are, in China's case, to also contend with India, because China and India have had their armed disputes, and those are also two nuclear armed countries. And perhaps there's a prestige factor involved with building more ICBMs, but I think a big one has to do with US missile defenses.
Is India doing anything comparable?
I would say not comparable, but they are certainly also, modernizing their nuclear forces just like everyone else.
Okay, all right. So you found this thing. Now, how many are there, and at what stage? Are they doing them all at once, all over the place, or 3 or 4 here, and then they'll do 3 or 4 more over there, or something like that? Can you predict how many they intend to do in all, and are they starting them at the same time, etc.?
Yeah, so very helpfully, they built their perimeter first, kind of, and they started filling it in with various silos and then clearings. And so from there, what we can do is kind of take that pattern, which they've used both in this site and in other sites across the country. And we can look at that pattern and say, okay, if each silo is spaced, approximately 3 kilometers apart, and if they're building all these roads to them, we can sort of predict where each one is going to be. And all in all, we estimated that they would ultimately build around 110 silos in that particular site. And then adding that together with the other sites that other researchers have found, that equates to approximately 250 new silos under construction, like in various.
In addition to whatever they have now, how much do you think? Do you know how many they have?
So we estimate that they have approximately 20 fixed silos already. So that there had 20 to begin with, and these were kind of for older, older missiles, and now adding 250 onto that, and who knows if there's more. In addition to that, they also have lots of mobile missiles that don't require silos, but they would be, deployed in caves or things like that, buildings, garages.
Oh, I hadn't seen these numbers before, Matt. I knew you'd made some big discovery, but you're now making me cry, because these are numbers that are not just a small increment. They're entering the game, aren't they? Are they going to try to be a contestant?
I don't know.
I'm thinking back to Marlon Brando wanting to be a contestant.
A contender.
Yeah, contender. Yeah. Are they trying to be a contender for supremacy in the nuclear game, or what would be behind this? Nobody really needs 250 new missile silos for any good purpose.
No, I agree. It's definitely, it's pretty concerning. A couple, I guess, brighter spots, if there are some, is that, first of all, we don't know at this point how many of those silos are actually going to be filled with missiles. So that there's a possibility that, you know, maybe they won't fill all of their silos. Maybe some will be decoys. You know, who knows? And we also don't know yet what kinds of missiles are going to be put into them, right? So perhaps there's a chance that some will have, you know, multiple warheads on them, but maybe some of them will have, you know, only a single warhead. So it's still kind of unclear what's going to happen. But the other thing to kind of note is that even with all of these new silos, and even if China fills every single one of them, their nuclear arsenal is still, you know, a fraction of the size of both the United States and Russia. And I don't know if that's supposed to help us feel better or worse. But in my mind,
it doesn't. It just confirms how stupid everybody in the world is. Nobody rational, because no conceivable use, even in the worst nuclear war you want to imagine, you couldn't have a practical use for 250, you know, ICBM level warheads. You can't. It's 3 or 4 would be all you need.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's a pretty significant change, but I don't know. I don't see it necessarily as a sprint for parity with the United States or China. At least I hope not. You know, I hope that you know, they adopt the mindset of, you know, the goalposts for what counts as minimum deterrent have changed. We're going to meet that threshold and then stop building. I hope that there isn't more.
Well, they certainly will have, you know, met it already. Okay, now you've ruined my day. So I'm glad to meet you, but go away.
I'm
Okay,
sorry.
so what are you going to do with this information? And by the way, you say the US military or Pentagon or somebody sort of confirms what you've said. Do they talk about what they make of it, or have they made any analysis of what they think it means, or how it fits into other Chinese foreign policy moves? I mean, it's just one more a marker of, as far as I can tell, of what we're all seeing about China in other parts of the world, whether you're talking about Hong Kong or the Uyghurs or the Silk Road or even the Arctic, or, you know, they want to go where they don't belong, in Africa, all these other places where South China Sea with these islands and stuff. Boy, they are on the move. And I guess this is just one more part of it. And okay, what would you do? What would you do about it? You know, what would we do if you and I were the committee to change the world and everybody would obey us? I don't know what I would do.
So I think to my mind, the clearest path towards reining in the Chinese nuclear arsenals through arms control. The problem with this is that China is not interested in nuclear arms control at all, and they're not going to be interested in it as long as they think that they're not going to get anything out of it. And so I think that at the moment I'm quite pessimistic about the possibility of arms control, because I think what China wants to get from the United States is something that the United States is not willing to put on the table, right? The United States is not willing to discuss any limitations on its missile defenses at the moment. And I personally think that's a huge problem, right? Because I think that if you're not willing to even just talk about that or put that on the table for negotiations, then you have basically no leverage, because China is just not going to come to the table. And so, if I had the ability to, make people listen, I would say, the United States has to really clearly articulate what it's willing to give up in exchange for putting limits on Chinese nuclear forces. And I think, one of those good candidates is being willing to put limitations on its own missile defenses. I don't know if that's going to happen. It seems relatively unlikely, but that's kind of that would be my advice, in as much as anyone will listen to me.
Well, when Trump was still trumping, he was saying that next time the US and Russia meet, it needs to include China, and maybe he would like to have some other folks invited over. But I think everybody kind of laughed about that because nobody really thinks China wants to come.
Yeah.
Would this still be something that the Biden people would favor if China wanted to be party to the whole thing?
Yeah, I think, the impulse that the Trump administration had to include China in arms control, I think is not a bad impulse, because I think it's good to include, nuclear armed countries in talks like these. The problem with how the Trump administration approached the issue was that they seemed much more interested in kind of shaming and blaming China and Russia than they were actually interested in negotiating anything. And so they were using China as this kind of red herring to potentially get rid of New START, which is the last remaining bilateral treaty with the US and Russia on arms control. So they were kind of saying, all right, we want to get rid of New START, we want to renegotiate the entire thing, and we have to bring in China. China's not going to show up to that, and they didn't show up to that. And so the Trump administration was like, arms control is bad, let's throw the whole thing away. That is not the right approach, right? I think the impulse to include China is good, but if you want to include China, you have to, as I was kind of saying, you have to be willing to discuss, or at least, float the ideas of what you would be willing to give up and what you want to receive in return, right? Because that's how arms control negotiations work, right? You can't just demand that China stop building ICBMs if you're not going to be willing to give up something on your own end in return. And so I would hope that the Biden administration brings in China to arms control, because I think that's really important. But there's no point in doing it if you aren't willing to discuss limitations as well. Because if you're not willing to do that, then China's not going to show up, and the whole exercise is moot.
All right, so we'll send a copy of this video to Joe Biden and say, now here's the game plan. All right?
That sounds good.
This has been fun and very, very interesting and very informative. So you're a smart guy, and I'm glad you're on my team.
Thank you so much.